The air smelled of rain, burnt rubber, and something metallic, something that was probably me. I remember the sound most of all, a symphony of crumpling steel, shattering glass, and a scream that seemed to come from outside my own body. Then, the silence. A thick, woolen silence that pressed down on my ears. I couldn't move my legs. I could see the twisted steering column, the spider-webbed windshield, and the soft, relentless fall of rain blurring the streetlights into golden smears. That was the prologue. The real story began in the sterile, fluorescent-lit chapters of St. Vincent's Hospital. My name is Alara. I was 32, a landscape architect who built serene gardens for other people's lives. I had a husband, Marcus, whose smile used to feel like a private sunrise. We were coming back from a dinner, a celebration for a project I'd just landed. He was driving. A truck ran a red light. The physics were brutal and impartial. The first time I saw my reflection in the polished metal side of a hospital trolley, I didn't recognize the creature staring back. My face was a map of swelling and sutures. My body, from the waist down, was a distant, unresponsive country. The doctors used words like vertebral fracture, spinal cord edema, uncertain prognosis. They floated around my bed like kind ghosts, their voices a mixture of caution and hollow optimism. Marcus was there in the beginning. He held my hand, his grip tight, his eyes red-rimmed. He talked about fighting, about the best specialists, about how we'd get through this. His words were a lifeline I clung to with my fingernails. For 3 weeks, he was my anchor. He slept in the awful recliner by the window, fielded calls from worried friends, and pretended to understand the doctor's charts. Then, the tide began to turn. Not in my body, but in his eyes. It was the little things first. The way he'd flinch slightly when he had to help the nurse adjust me. The growing intervals between his visits, always explained by a big deal at work or needing to handle the insurance. His conversations shifted from we to you. You have to be strong. Your therapy is tomorrow. You need to try harder. The day they told me I might never walk again, that the damage was more severe than hoped, was the day the Marcus I knew finally left the room. He stood by the window, his back to me, silhouetted against the gray afternoon sky. "Alara," he said, his voice flat, devoid of the music I used to love. "I can't do this." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. "Do what?" I whispered, though I knew. "This." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the bed, at me. The constant, this, the care, the uncertainty, the wheelchair talks. It's not the life I signed up for. I felt something break inside me, something far more fragile than bone. I didn't sign up for a truck to run a red light either, Marcus. He turned then, and his face wasn't cruel, just empty, resolved. It was worse than anger. "I'll make sure the insurance is sorted. I'll pay for the first round of rehab, but I need to move on. You'll understand one day." He didn't kiss me goodbye. He just picked up his leather jacket from the chair, the one I'd bought him for his birthday, and walked out. The door side shut behind him with a finality that echoed in the hollow of my chest. That was the second accident. In some ways, it was worse than the first. The physical pain had a boundary, a location. This grief was a gas, filling every space, poisoning every memory. The love of my life, the man who promised, in sickness and in health, had seen the sickness and revoked the contract. The next year was a blur of pain, both physical and psychic. I was discharged to a rehabilitation center that smelled of antiseptic and defeated hope. My parents, bless them, became my rocks. My mother, a quiet librarian, read to me for hours. My father, a retired engineer, became an expert on accessibility, modifying their home with ramps and rails before I even arrived. But the real work was mine, alone, in the quiet hours of the night, staring at the ceiling. I had to learn how to live in a body that felt like a betrayal. I had to mourn the loss of my mobility, my career, my independence, and my marriage, all at once. The anger was a fire that kept me warm at first. I burned with fury at the truck driver, at fate, and most of all, at Marcus. But anger is a fuel that eventually consumes its container. I had to find something else. My salvation came in two forms: clay and code. An art therapist at the rehab center, a woman with kind eyes and paint-stained fingers, placed a lump of wet clay on a wheel in front of me. "Your hands still work," she said simply, "so let them speak." My first attempts were pathetic, collapsing blobs. But my hands, which used to sketch garden layouts and feel the texture of soil, remembered purpose. I learned to brace my torso, to use the strength in my shoulders and arms. I couldn't control my legs, but I could control the spin of the wheel, the pressure of my fingers. I began to create. Not pretty vases, but twisted, tormented forms, shapes that echoed my fractured spine, my broken heart. Then, slowly, the shapes began to change. They became stronger, more deliberate. A vessel with a crack repaired with gold lacquer, the Japanese art of kintsugi. A sturdy, asymmetrical bowl that embraced its imbalance. The second salvation was a suggestion from my father. "You can't run around sites anymore, kid," he said, his voice gentle. "But your brain is sharper than ever. What about the digital world?" He bought me a powerful laptop, and I dove in. I started with graphic design, then 3D modeling. I discovered a passion for creating virtual landscapes, lush, impossible gardens that defied gravity and season. I built digital oases for video games, then for architectural firms who wanted immersive previews of their projects. My physical limitations vanished in the code. In this digital universe, I could fly over my creations. I could make trees grow with a keystroke. I could design waterfalls that flowed upward. I combined my two worlds. I started a small online gallery selling my physical pottery, each piece photographed against the backdrop of a digital garden I'd created specifically for it. The story, my story, leaked out. A local paper did a feature, "From Wreckage to Wheel, the Digital Botanist." It went viral in certain circles. 5 years after the accident, I was no longer Alara, the victim. I was Alara Vance, founder of Terrain Digital, a boutique firm specializing in biophilic digital design. We created serene, nature-inspired virtual spaces for corporate clients, wellness apps, and even virtual reality therapy programs. My pottery, now exhibited in galleries, funded a foundation for adaptive art programs. I lived in a beautiful, accessible loft I designed myself, a physical space that was as thoughtful and flowing as my digital ones. I had friends, a vibrant community, a life that was rich and full, even if it was lived from a seated position. I thought of Marcus sometimes, of course. The memory had lost its jagged edge, sanded down by time and accomplishment into a smooth, sad stone. I heard snippets through the old, fraying grapevine. He'd left the city. His career had stalled. There was a divorce from a woman he'd married quickly after leaving me. It was all vague, distant thunder from a storm that had long passed over my horizon. Then, one crisp autumn day, he walked back into my life. I was at a high-profile tech and design conference, the keynote speaker. I'd just finished my talk, Cultivating Resilience, Designing for Imperfection in a Digital Age, and was surrounded by a cluster of people near the stage, answering questions. I felt a shift in the air, a familiar prickle on the back of my neck. I looked over the head of a young designer and saw him, Marcus. He stood at the edge of the crowd, looking like a ghost from a past life. He was still handsome, but it was a faded handsomeness. His suit was good, but slightly rumpled. His hair thinner, his face etched with lines of weariness that hadn't been there before. He was holding a conference program, looking utterly lost. Our eyes met. A jolt, not of old love, but of sheer, surreal recognition passed between us. He looked shocked. The woman in the sleek wheelchair, dressed in a tailored emerald green suit, commanding a room of hundreds, confident and laughing. This was not the broken creature he'd left in a hospital bed. The crowd eventually dispersed, drawn to wine and canapes. I told my assistant I'd be a moment and wheeled myself toward the bank of windows overlooking the city. I knew he would follow. Alara. His voice was the same, but softer, drained of its old certainty. Marcus. I didn't turn, watching the sunset paint the skyscrapers gold. This is a surprise. I saw the speaker list. I had to come. I couldn't believe it was you. It's me. I finally turned to face him. Mostly. He flinched at that. You look incredible. What you've done, I've read about your company. It's amazing. Thank you. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. What are you doing here, Marcus? Really? He looked down, shuffling his feet. The confident man who walked out of my hospital room was gone. I'm between things. Consulting. It's not great. The last few years haven't been kind. I waited. I felt no urge to fill the silence for him. I left you, he said, the words rushing out as if he'd been holding them for a decade. I know that. I was a coward. I was terrified. I saw that life, that chair, and I just ran. I told myself it was for the best, that you'd be better off without me dragging you down. It was a lie. I was just weak. I listened, surprised by the calmness inside me. The storm had passed. This was just the damp, quiet aftermath. Yes, I said simply, you were. He looked startled, as if he expected anger, tears, or perhaps forgiveness served on a platter. My calm disarmed him. I've regretted it every single day, he whispered, his voice cracking. Seeing you now, it just hammers it home. You're a phoenix, Alara, and I'm just ashes. I looked at him, this man I had once loved with my whole young heart. I saw the fear that had curdled inside him, the fear that had turned to self-pity, and then to a series of poor choices. He hadn't just left me, he'd abandoned himself. I'm not a phoenix, Marcus, I said, my voice quiet but clear. A phoenix burns and is reborn from its own ashes. That's a myth. What happened to me was slower. It was more like erosion. The accident, you leaving, the pain. It was a river that carved away everything that wasn't essential. It washed away the soft soil of who I thought I was, of the life I thought I'd have. What was left was the bedrock, hard, unyielding, and real. I just learned to build on that. He stared at me, tears in his eyes now. Is there any chance, any way back? Not to how it was, but to something? For a moment, I saw not the man who abandoned me, but the young man who loved picnics and bad movies, who believed in a future that was simple and bright. That man was gone. We both were. No, Marcus, I said, and the words held no bitterness, only a profound, peaceful finality. There's no way back. The river doesn't flow backwards. You made your choice, and in a terrible, twisted way, it was the choice that forced me to find myself. I don't thank you for it. I don't forgive the cruelty of it, but I have made peace with it. You need to make peace with it too. He looked shattered. He had come, I realized, hoping for a redemption arc in my story where he could play a part. But my story was mine alone now. I should go, he mumbled, wiping his eyes. I'm glad you're well, Alara, truly. I am well, I agreed. I hope you find your way, Marcus. I really do, but it's not with me. I watched him walk away, his shoulders slumped, disappearing into the glittering crowd. He was a ghost, and I had finally laid him to rest. My assistant approached, concern on her face. Everything okay, Alara? I took a deep breath, the cool, conditioned air filling my lungs. I looked out at the city, twinkling to life in the twilight, a landscape I had learned to navigate on my own terms. Yes, I said, and for the first time, I felt the truth of it in every cell of my reconstructed life. Everything is perfectly okay. I turned my wheelchair away from the window, away from the past, and rolled forward into the bright, buzzing present, ready for whatever came next. The road had been brutal, but the view from here was mine.